Welcome back to session 47. In this session, I would like to extend a little further on the subject that we touched upon in the past two sessions. And we're talking about the standards, good for whom. And here is one, case in point. Back in the, I guess, the peak time of globalization, and the conglomerates basically spreaded their eggs all over the place in so many baskets. And of course, the diversified supply chain and, the assemblies, production lines, all over the world. Eventually, they add up to the numbers apparently satisfy the the shareholders of those conglomerates, the ones that traded publicly in the market. So apparently, those are good business decisions made by the corporate senior management, and supported by the shareholders. So that was good, right? But was it good for the, the workers at the home countries where the HQ of those corporations are located at? Be it USA, whichever part of the USA, or be it in Europe, could be Switzerland, could be Germany, could be France. And when the people lost their jobs to the overseas competitions where the labors are cheaper, do you think it's the same standard and expect them to say, oh, this is a great decision? Or that would not happen unless, and there's a big if here, if the legislature basically introduce the laws, the regulations, taxing those conglomerates have their overseas investment, who pays the corporate income tax to the government where their overseas investments are, but also to pay tax for the unemployment back home, where in the country where their corporate headquarters are located. If that happens, at least the people working or used to work in the industry that was here in this country but went away, they would have some, way of maintain certain standard of living, rather than basically just left out there hanging and dry, bleeding to dry, all on their own by themselves, right? So this is something I believe it's about the the standard, good for who. So if a society constantly repeating itself in pattern, to see this kind of social behaviors with the single standard satisfying a certain group, which is actually, statistically a much smaller group, at the, price of, bigger crowd in terms of population. And then I guess we would have a good reason to question, is this society actually practicing the reasonable, policy or law to make sure the social wealth redistribution is really in a fair manner that is reasonable to all, not just to satisfy, a handful of super rich people, so that this country is really all about winner takes it all, and the rest of us are just a bunch of losers. Is that a great country when we think about Make America Great Again? Is that a great America? Or be it, is that, would that be a great Germany or great France or great China? If most of the people are not protected for their basic living. So when you have, quite a proportion of Americans living without the health insurance, you know, you tell me that's America that is so great. Look at all the other industrial countries. Most people, if not all of them, are protected, you know, with the health insurance. So they would not hesitate. Do I want to go to see a doctor when I have a medical problem? Either because I don't have money or I'm worried about the bill. Is that a basic human rights? For a contemporary society, you tell me that is, a great America. That is going to be quite a convincing job to do, right? Or let's look at this, a little in a little bigger picture, right? So we were talking about the certain legislation work to make sure the overseas investment of this diversified investment strategy, whatever, is to be governed by certain laws and regulations to make sure that people lose their jobs at home country where the HQ of these corporations are compensated with certain resource for funding to help them in the transitional period, so they could receive some kind of training and then moving on to somewhat a newer industry away from the sundown industry that will end up in the places where labor is cheaper, anyway, right? So the long-term consideration, the long-term strategy for any government, I don't care if it's USA or any European countries or China or Japan or Korea, the long-term consideration is really about education and training, so you can have the people of your own country, the citizen of your own society, to stay ahead, keep in pace, with the development, with the progress, be capable and ready to find yourself a place in the new industry, the emerging industry. And that's the way I believe, to be a leader. When you have a brand new industry and your education is not quite there, so what happens? Take a look at the Silicon Valley or Seattle, right? The software industry or whatever, the IT industry, dominantly, you will see lots of Asians. But then in the meantime, the top tier education institution, they practice in a clear pattern, denying the fair and equal opportunity of the Asian students, even though a lot of them born and raised here, just ethnic Asian Americans. And then what's the result? Okay, so a lot of them came from Asia. So why? Because our education system here apparently failed to produce enough, right, graduates coming out the program to fill up the industry. So while our top tier R&D brilliant people, a lot of them were local, but also quite some came from foreign countries. But they are here in this country. We're still leading as of today in science, technologies, arts, because we are so great. So we actually attract talent from all over the world. But now the administration is totally, practicing a entirely different direction. So once this country is, basically self-isolated, and we stop to take the best, the brightest minds, I I don't know if that one we can still lead the science and technologies and arts, from this country to lead the whole world into the directions that we set. Can we continue do that? Are we going to be capable of doing that? And then even if, let's say, we're leading as we are today, what about the industries? Is it really made up by the people completely educated in this country? If not, what does that say about the education? The education system today in America becomes totally irrelevant because the education institutions in this country is pretty much ignorant. Okay, as far as I could say, I could see a lot of education institutions do not even know they have the crisis coming up, uh, towards them. They don't see that. So one Chinese saying, very traditional saying, says, 人无远虑，必有近忧. What does that mean in English? It means if you do not worry about the future, you will constantly be dealing with the problems on spot. Okay, so that tells you about what Taoism teaching is talking about. Having a broader view, being able to see way ahead in a much bigger picture. So this is where I think most of the American education institutions fail, because they are just so tangled up with everything, that is their immediate concern. They have no vision. Is that, the institutions alone to be blamed? No. I think, again, this is my personal take, the American government failed to provide the sufficient fund so that the American education institutions, especially the public ones, do not have to worry about the tuition revenue to keep the institution financially, afloat. Take a look at the difference between the education institutions in Europe and the public education institutions in America. The ones in Europe, they basically, what is driving them, with the motivation is really just about academic paper contributions on the top. Whereas in the USA, if you're, basically at the college or school level of an university, public university, or, coming down to the department, basically you have to worry about money, right? You have certain financial resources allocated to you as available resource, and then you basically just have to worry about enrollment. And then, hey, the academic program, the courses designed, are they quite there? It's almost like, who cares? I mean, you look at the graduates from all those, I'm sorry, but third class, education institutions, the graduates coming out of them, can they land the jobs? What does a piece of, degree paper mean to the future employers in the industries when the education institution becomes so irrelevant to the society? What it gets, justifiably, is what it deserves, because you're irrelevant to the others. So who cares how many graduates you turn out, and you want to just basically shove it all up to my side, so I take them all? I'm sorry, I'm running business here. Do you have the right product for me, right? So this is coming down all to the competitions. Why? Ask yourself, why the employers are willing to take the immigrants from other countries. Was it because they're cheaper? No, by law. When you hire a foreigner working in this country, it's going to be the same pay. So apparently it's not economic motivation. So then why? Because our education system right here at home are failing completely because they're becoming irrelevant. Now that's a much bigger problem by itself. So when you tell me we have a racial problem, yes, we do. But I think this is a much bigger problem. And when we have a sitting, American president saying he's the one alone responsible to, make America great again, all the president before him failed. Okay, he can claim whatever he wants. He's definitely entitled to his own opinion. You like it or you don't like it, apart from his public function as the president of the United States, basically we all agree that he's not a politician. He doesn't say the words politically correct. He liked to take credit, for everything. That's just basically being who he is. I mean, what's wrong with that, right? But then, hey, in the meantime, he has the right to say whatever he wants to say. I don't have the obligation to believe. I don't have to take his word for it. So here's the thing. I believe, from what I know, which is, I guess, limited, the Chinese have exactly the same problem. All of them have 4-year terms at every level. So at the end of that 4 years, which is basically, I think, signified by this National Congress, whatever, every time when one conference, which is every 4 years, I don't know for sure exactly, but anyway, just people stop every 4 years. Why? Because they don't know who's going to be in which chair. And this, personnel change definitely would bring some, policy change too. But what they have over there, because there's always just a one party in power for 70 years, and that party makes the long-term planning, okay, working. So regardless, the individual change from the individual political position, that 5-year planning system is always there. They still have to make sure that is being done. Okay, that's a guideline. We don't have that here in a democratic, America. So when one guy is worried about his 4-year term, and he introduced, especially lately, his own, I guess, game rules. So what happened to the long term, like I just mentioned? Who is covering the future of this country that's supposedly to be great again, single-handedly under the leadership of one person? Okay. To tell you the truth, I am not, feeling so comfortable with what's going on, everything around there. And I do not believe, just some political slogan, shouting out in the street, and then, followed by some street violence, looting and stealing and hurting people. Does that add up to whatever, the harmonious society? I don't believe so. So once again, we're coming back to the standard. So what is the standard? Who is American? What is America? What is American democracy, right? We are supposed to share the same value, and now the values seem to be challenged. So I don't know, this is really about black or white or Latin or Asian. I don't believe that. Like I said before, I was a teaching professional at the high education level, and what I saw was the pretty much equally disadvantaged group of students. And they didn't know that. They didn't know they were disadvantaged, okay? So as far as I'm concerned, I did not see any, racial, differences in this disadvantage among the group of students that I came to teach. Just so happened. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe one particular racial or ethnic group was more disadvantaged when it comes to education. And once again, education actually changed the values over time, right? So if we look at the American legislation, basically the way it progressed, in pace with the history, with the time, we see a lot of things accomplished. Of course, do we need the movements to help, you know, pushing it? It sure wouldn't hurt, as long as it's peaceful. But the point I'm trying to, basically make here is, if you look at the Americans of different generations, the values are completely different. My value about what is, I guess, American value, I believe, is somehow different from the younger Americans, born, raised, you know, post 1990s or year 2000. I was told, by the younger generation, when they go to a cinema and see a movie, if they see it's all white or all black, they don't feel comfortable. They don't want to watch that movie. That's a little, I guess, forward thinking from realities, that I am, I guess, seeing. But again, that's just me, right? Of course, you see the younger Americans, they hang out with all different kind of, I guess, ethnic groups. They don't have problem with that. It's not like I do. I don't either. But I'm not just at the same, I guess, level as they are. And that basically, that's how the history, progress, right? So the education system is definitely doing its work on this part, not on the academic part that I was talking about, but as far as like, the value, try to meet the gaps. But still, certain subculture, came with certain value that is outside what the education system covering. And this education system I'm talking about is more like elementary, middle school, high school, because it'll be too late when you try to change people's value at high education level, right? But back to that point, that's why I see the East Asian, not just Chinese alone, but East Asian, which is basically, when you talk about East Asian, is more like the Confucianism, as the driver. You see the East Asians are much more motivated for hard works, which reflected throughout the elementary school, middle school, and high school. And I know for a fact a lot of schools, especially in Texas, because better academic performance would get them extra, I guess, financial resource from the government. So they all they're competing to get that resource by turning out the better academic performances throughout all different test process. And in every one of them, they mix the Asian students with the white students, so that they can. That's what I was told. Okay, don't hold me to it. I mean, you can, don't take my word for it. Go check and find out. But if that turned out to be true, what did that say? When the Asian students were used, for the better academic performances at middle school, high school, but they're denied for the equal opportunity in admission at the top tier education institution system. Now tell me, is that the same standard when we talk about, racial equality? Really? I don't think so. I'm not saying this because I am Asian American, ethnically, but it is just to choose, and so happen because I noticed, right? Personally, I don't really identify myself as Asian American or whatever American. I am who I am, right? Because I hate all this label system. Because when you started that way, okay, black versus white, yellow versus the brown, okay, or red, now we're all coming up with certain, image associated with that label. Guess what? Color in the ancient Chinese system, not today, ancient Chinese, color actually means uniquely different things. For instance, Yellow, I don't have a problem with being called yellow. Yellow in ancient Chinese society was a color exclusively preserved for the royalties. That doesn't mean I want to or even need to be or want to be a royalty, but I'm just saying there's nothing negative associated with the color yellow. But in English, that could, basically hint on being a coward. That's English, right? I don't know what it means in Italian or German or French, but hey, you see what you want to see, right? So that's yellow. What is the color a Chinese definitely, I don't know about the contemporary Chinese today, but what is the color that Chinese absolutely would not want to be associated with? Green. In English, in America, green is the color of US dollar, right? But the color green in the ancient Chinese society was by law reserved for the household in the business of prostitutions. By law, in the Ming Empire, the man of the household where prostitution business is practiced were required to wear either the head or the scarf in green. Basically, to tell people, my household is running prostitution business. That was by law. So in Ming Empire, some of the criminal punishment, basically like a community service, they would force this, people with the criminal offenses, serving their sentences to wear green. Basically, it's just to shame them, right? So that's why green would not be a color welcomed by the Chinese. But of course, what is white as a color for the Chinese in ancient Chinese society? White was exclusively reserved for funerals, right? Everything would be in white. So that is why I think it's pretty stupid business to label everything with color. I mean, sure, you have to admit there's certain different values out there that come with different, subcultures of all the different ethnic groups. There's no denying in that. But when you try to label everything in the political, incorrect generalization, it's just not going to help. Okay, when you have any incident coming out, instead of having the entire truth with all contributing elements reflected as the whole truth, you just so quickly label everything and make it a ratio, certain group against other certain group. I just don't think that's going to help. In this country, the last thing it needs is the polarization. And eventually, I would really hate to see the extreme left against the extreme, right, armed and come into this conflict, in violence. That's the last thing we need, okay? So we need a harmonious society. And by shouting all this racial slogan, single out one racial group, that's not equality, okay? All lives matter, not just white lives, or not just the black, or not just Latin, not just the Asian. All lives matter, okay? So we need to hold this value, and this is something we absolutely need. So this is the standards, hopefully can be developed to be accepted by all. So if each and every one of us sit where, our little corner in looking at the world from our own angle, and we want to promote basically our own agenda, that is not fair. That is not equal, because you don't really think having your own best interests out there, over the interests of other groups, that's not fair. Okay. So anyway, that's just what I think, and I'm sharing here. I know you may not totally agree with me. That's okay. You can say what you want to say. I can say what I want to say. That's our constitutional rights, right? I guess that's our freedom. So anyway, let's wrap up this session right here. Ciao.